So this is obviously pretty informal, but what I'm hoping we can do is capture some shared priorities that, well, actually, let me start recording this. That would be a good place to start. All right, we are now recording. So the goal I'm hoping for this road mapping session is to come out with some shared priorities that we all agree we should work on in the coming year, so we have some idea of what VuFind 5.0 looks like. Also, maybe getting some people to specifically volunteer for working on specific items, since the more capacity we have to do things, the more stuff we can get done. I certainly don't want to just make excuses, but we're hiring new team members and have many things going on over here, so certainly VuFind isn't getting 100% of our effort at Villanova, though it's obviously a high priority. So certainly support from elsewhere is greatly appreciated, and I want to set our plans realistically. But we can certainly make a long list and then just not cry if we don't get it all done in a year. So a couple of things that are on the top of my mind, and Chris, you can shout if they're already in this document or add them if they're not. Certainly we already talked about improved ILS support, which I think has to be a fairly high priority, and we already have plans in place to make that happen. So that's not news, but it should go on the roadmap for sure. There's also a couple of ideas that have been discussed recently that I wanted to get on the table for road mapping are the idea of two-factor authentication. I don't know if anyone needs that, but if they do, we should come up with a way to support it. If they don't, we'll just keep talking about it until somebody says, yeah, I need that. And there was also a recent request about improved user customization options. So like saving your sort and limit preferences and so forth in a persistent manner. And that's something that's been in JIRA for years and years. There hasn't been a lot of call for it, but maybe we finally reached the point where somebody cares. And PHP 7 is something we should talk about. What do we want to set as our next version PHP requirement? Are there obstacles to going to 7? Do we want to jump straight to 7.1? Because I know some of our dependent libraries are doing that, apparently due to concerns about bugs in 7.0. But at the same time, 7.0 seems to be in a lot of Linux distributions, so 7.1 is going to limit us more.
Is this helpful?
Yes, that is helpful.
Okay.
I see Solar 7, but not PHP 7.
I was looking at JIRA tickets.
Solar 7 is something we need to look at too.
What's that?
That is great. Chris, are you interested in walking us through some of the stuff that you've put up there, or?
Up here? Sure. Like, is this currently the roadmap?
Yeah, yeah. And if you want to, why don't you come up here so
Sure.
everyone can hear you?
So, a lot of what's here was between Array and I, so it's gonna be a lot of front end stuff. Maybe I'll make a category for it. But Objectify all JS was an Array thing. I think that's not a bad idea for going for JavaScript. Improved front end feature modularity was talking about what we were talking about during the state of the front end talk earlier. Just put it on there so it didn't lose track of it and get a starting point for all that. Caching of images, right now, this was areas we discussed it. So you see there's grayed out text here. That was discussion before we realized that we should probably keep it to the comments to keep this clean. I just didn't want to lose it. I wasn't sure where to put that. looking into Zen Framework 3 current existing ideas that the cache isn't just cache files, or like we have the asset pipeline which uses hashed file names. Maybe putting those someplace like in like a database or in some other easier to load balance setup. So more production performance ideas. And I think the rest of these were arrays if you wanted to add comments himself. Array?
Sorry, I lost my mouse cursor for a while, so I couldn't unmute myself. Okay, I'm here. These are in no particular order, so some of these are small and some of these are huge. Like more APIs part. When the search API was introduced, there were quite a few parties that were really enthusiastic, but soon enough some came up with the question of how to access patron information or holdings information and everything else that's available in VuFind. And that's something we should look at some point. But since those things include privacy issues and potential performance issues related to the backend ILS systems and everything else, it gets really complicated quite quickly. So it should include something like API key management and maybe some kinds of thresholds or limits to per day and per minute or so, rate limiting or anything like that's necessary to protect the backend services and of course how to make it so that it's safe, especially with regards to the patron functionality. So it's something to maybe discuss at some point, but I don't have anything precisely thought out yet. The next point about adding an extra field to search params objects is just something that we found when extending the functionality in search features, is that there is no way to plug extra information into saved search objects. So if you had like an extra field that was always saved with all the other information, it would make it so much easier. You wouldn't have to subclass everything always when we're doing stuff. Then the third one about removing support for non-JavaScript supporting process in places where it affects performance. I think there are a couple of situations like side facets, the hierarchical facets, and the hierarchy tree, and maybe other places too, where there's actually a HTML render of the tree first, and then it's used only if JavaScript is not available, and we could get rid of all that if we decided not to support those features when JavaScript is disabled. Because I don't think these days that should be a requirement. I know Damien has been trying to keep it working without JavaScript, and I appreciate that. But I think there are a couple of situations at least where we are doing a lot of work that most are not using. Most, if any, users are actually seeing. Then we've had some user requests to add more fields to launch lists, like the item barcodes and other information regarding the launch. Possibly, if it's possible, they would like to know if there are like holes on the particular items and things like that, and maybe more of the metadata regarding the launch. So I'm going to look at that at some point. And then the final one on this screen is sort of an electronic library card support that came up with some of the public libraries in Finland, and we just added support for displaying a barcode of the library card on the screen, so a user can especially laser readers have some trouble with those screens, but otherwise in many places there has been some enthusiasm regarding that, and I think if I had the chance to use that myself, I would really love it, because then I could just forget the library card code and have all the library cards in VuFind and use them from there.
Thank you. That all makes a lot of sense. A few comments on a few of those things, if nobody minds listening to me ramble for a minute. Feel free to take notes, Chris, if you think it's worth it. On the API front, I know that there has been some discussion in the past about the fact that there are the Dia and Paya API specs for ILS interaction. And in theory, it might be possible to write some kind of a wrapper that would expose those APIs on top of the VuFind drivers. I'm sure that is extremely non-trivial work, but I wonder if that might be a way of getting some of this stuff without reinventing the wheel. If somebody wanted to invest time in that, maybe that's a strategy for at least beginning to investigate what's feasible. We had talked in the past about maybe the whole ILS driver mechanism gets split off to a separate project that includes these API wrappers and then gets pulled into VuFind as a dependency, which in an idealized world makes a lot of sense and sounds great. I have a feeling there are many practical concerns that make that difficult, but it's an area that could be investigated. The idea of adding an extra field to search parameters for serialization makes perfect sense to me. That might not even be that big of a project just to get the mechanism in place. A bigger project might be figuring out an existing place where we could use that in place of something more complicated. But anyway, I would certainly welcome a pull request for that. As far as removing JavaScript, or rather removing non-JavaScript support, I'm definitely willing to make that compromise in cases where we're doing extra work for practically nobody. One of the reasons I tend to insist on having non-JavaScript support where it's not inconvenient is that it's very helpful in debugging a lot of the time, because if something is broken and you can disable JavaScript and see if it's still broken, it tends to give you more direct visibility to what's going on. But in cases of like these hierarchy trees, what's going on is madness, and I would not be opposed to simplifying that. Though I do at least insist that if we take away a feature, we put in a message saying this is missing because you have JavaScript disabled, which is easy enough. But as you say, the group of people that are using these features in non-JavaScript browsers is tiny, if not non-existent. And so it doesn't make sense for us to waste resources on that unless somebody can prove that there's a need, and I doubt that anyone can. So that's certainly something I'm willing to put on the deprecation list for 5.0. And what else did we have? More fields on loans list, yeah, that's fine. The on-screen barcode thing also sounds like a great configurable feature. That's something that we probably would want to make configurable because people might find it confusing if they don't expect it, but I see the benefits, and we've already got a QR code generator in VuFind, so it's probably not that hard to do.
It is indeed trivial to do technically. Of course, the more important question is how to expose it to the user.
Right. And also, I imagine what barcode format to use, because QR code makes sense, but you might want to be able to output different kinds of barcodes for different kinds of scanners. That could quickly become complicated.
Yeah, that's true. We were actually thinking about this. Of course, code 3 of 9 is the usual one, and it works in many places, but there are scanners that can use QR code too. So we were actually thinking of putting those two on the same page or same screen.
Yeah, that's true. That makes sense.
That might work. Maybe even a horizontal and a vertical one. But that's something to discuss.
Right. But certainly I would welcome a pull request there, and then we could refine it based on whatever starting point we come from.
Yeah.
Oh, sure, sure. If you want to come up and talk about it as you add it, you're welcome to, or you don't have to. Okay. And actually, I'm just going to run and close the door for a second. Oh, thank you. So Chris, were you able to find our Summit 2016 tagged JIRA tickets to see if there's anything in there
I
worth?
linked them at the top.
Oh, nice.
The other top.
Oh, yes. So last year we opened a whole bunch of JIRA tickets after the summit, and we closed a lot of them, but some of them we didn't. I thought it might be worth reviewing those to see where we are. I think this one is about having a stack map built into VuFind, which is something that a number of people are doing in different ways, and it's often a trivial integration, but we don't have anything native. I don't know that we've made any progress on that front, or that we have a clear need or plan. But shout if you feel differently.
I think we have something we could contribute. Maybe it's just for integrating external services, but there is some configuration and things ways to do it in a couple of different pieces of software. So I could at least maybe come up with something at some point.
Okay, great. So we can keep that one in play. We've already talked about the Alma driver, that is in play. Elasticsearch, we had done a little bit of experimentation with building a back-end integration for Elasticsearch, and I think that was largely theoretical, and the major holdup was that we have SolarMark, but we don't have Elasticsearch mark. I think this is something perhaps worth continuing to look at, again, from a theoretical basis, but I don't think we have a real-life need for it at this point in time, other than perhaps growing frustration with Solar, but I don't know that Elasticsearch is necessarily going to address all the issues. I think it will just have a different set of issues. We talked a bit about the JSON Facet API. I think this ticket may need to be revised into look at all the new APIs. Oh, this list includes tickets that we've resolved. Let's not look at those. Pardon me.
Why not? It feels good to see something resolved.
Well, there's evidence that we did in fact resolve some things. So, review and revise ILS driver interface, we've already talked about that a little bit. Standardize ILS driver parameters, another facet of the same thing. Migrate ILS drivers to standalone project, we talked about that. Geographic enhancements, we talked about that. The simplified spell checking is something that I know some code got written and I never got that code. So that might be worth following up on again.
We again have some customization regarding that, so maybe something we can look at together.
That would be great. And OAuth OpenID login with single click. I don't exactly remember. I think this is the idea of having a generic way of dealing with OAuth providers. Right now we have a broken Facebook authentication method that nobody has seen fit to fix and nothing else. Whereas this is looking at a more generic way of approaching that problem. Again, nice in theory. I don't know if we have immediate demand for it. But that's a reasonably small list of tickets that we didn't get to from last time. So, what do we need to discuss here? I'm definitely interested in hearing some thoughts on the PHP 7 issues. Does anyone have strong opinions about that, one way or another?
Well, I don't know if this counts as a strong opinion, but we are ready to move to 7.1, so no objections here at least. We are now running PHP 7.0 something, so in production, so
Yeah,
7.1 shouldn't be a problem.
we are too. We're running about half our servers were on PHP 7 already.
Okay, so I'm hearing from Leela, they're also on PHP 7 point something.
7.0 actually.
Yeah,
We're running VuFind 3.1.3 on those ones as well as 4.1. So it works fine on both.
I think probably my gut feeling is let's start by trying to raise the requirement to 7.0 rather than being extra aggressive and saying 7.1, but be open to the possibility of raising it further if we find that it's not workable on 7.0 due to some kind of dependency hell situation that we might conceivably run into.
Our operating system makes some of the PHP upgrades difficult, but I will check in on that stuff and I'll see, because I think it's silly to hold the project back for something like that.
Which operating system?
It's one of the Red Hats.
That's what it was.
We can also, from the crowd there was a comment that one of the Red Hats makes PHP upgrades difficult, and we're running Red Hat and using like not the out-of-the-box PHP with that, so we could compare notes if necessary for sure.
Okay,
But PHP 7 is so much better than PHP 5, it just makes sense to push people in that direction if we can possibly get there. Just for the double question mark operator alone, I'm dying to go to 7.0. If you're not familiar with this, this allows you to get rid of the logic we have all over the place where is set variable question mark colon default value. You can just say variable question mark default value and express the same thing. It's beautiful. I don't know who domain is, but
Who knows everything?
pardon me.
Just a quick note I added this to the PHP 7 support is that there are a couple of repositories for Red Hat and CentOS that provide PHP 7 packages, so it shouldn't be impossible at all.
Yeah, that's my feeling as well. It's maybe just a question of whether institutional policy allows use of those repositories, but hopefully.
I think the software collections library actually allows you to run them side by side so that the default PHP stays at the old version. So if the policy gets in the way, it may be possible to have it as an optional installation.
Yeah, definitely. The PHP 5.6 we're using installs in like opt PHP 5.6 something, and then uses alternatives to set defaults. So you could theoretically have multiple versions living in parallel and be okay. Another thing that I know has been discussed in some of the pull requests is getting PHP CS Fixer upgraded to the 2.0 version, which I think is finally possible after months of waiting for them to merge a pull request. So that's something I'm hoping to do in the near future, and that will enable us to, I think, have more expressive configurations of our style preferences, and maybe also start style fixing templates as well as core code, which would be nice because our templates are definitely not as consistently formatted as everything else.
There is the additional upside to that the PHP CS Fixer 2 has this caching option, which tremendously speeds up the checking.
That is
Because
great.
you can skip the files that are not modified.
Put that in your priority change. Okay. I'm gonna do that.
And I suppose another question implicit in this priority changes section is, what is our next version? Do we want to have a 4.2 that just adds a few things, or do we want to jump to 5.0 next? I'm leaning toward 5.0 next, but if there are high priority features that people want to see, say in the next 3 to 4 months rather the next 6 to 8 months, a 4.2 might be valuable. But I'm,
Well,
oh, go ahead.
at least if you're moving to PHP 7, it should be version 5, I think.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, that's part of the question is there something we should prioritize finishing up before we go to the PHP 7 stuff or not? Of course, there's also always the option of creating a release 4.2 branch off of release 4.1 and then backporting things. But the less work we have to do, the happier I am.
I suppose you have the best view of all the things that are happening, so at least I can't really say we don't have any urgent matters or anything that's pressing. But then again, we have so many customizations already that if we have something that we need to do quickly, we just customize the hell out of it and think about merging about it later.
Honestly, at this point, I feel like a lot of the outstanding things that need to get merged are the last round of Chris's UI fixes and improvements, which are potentially disruptive enough that I'd rather see them in 5.0 than 4.2 anyway. Which is not to say they're as big as the last round of UI changes. I think the whole point of the last round of UI changes was to reduce the impact of future UI changes.
Yes.
But there are just a few rough edges that have yet to be polished, and we need to get that done. And Ben wanted to say something.
Well, I was just curious if you have other examples of like fragmentation opportunities. What I mean by that is like when you hit a major version and you're going to leave some people behind. Has that happened before, like with other major PHP versions or maybe Solar versions? Have you experienced that?
So Ben's question was whether we've experienced fragmentation in the past when we've made upgrades like requiring PHP 7. And I would say that the biggest fragmentation occurred with the VuFind 1 to 2 transition, because that was a total rewrite of everything, and it was too much to expect everyone to upgrade. As far as I know, there are still a few people running VuFind 1, which makes me weep at night. But I think since then we've been very conservative, and we've been less likely to leave people behind by our choices, which is not to say that everyone is constantly upgrading, but the fragmentation is less serious because moving from VuFind 2.0 to 5.0 is less painful than moving from 1.0 to 2.0, which is not to say it's not painful, but there's always this tension between, do we move forward or do we continue to support the installed base? And I feel like there's increasing pressure to change, even though I'm personally rather change averse. There's just every year something new comes along that makes me think, I gotta change this, I don't want to, but I've gotta do it because the benefits are worth it.
I can comment on our behalf that Damien is right that the version 2 upgrade was a really laborsome one because we have to rewrite all the customizations. But from then on, it's been like a continuous integration of new features process. So we had just quite recently one from the management side asked about version 4 since he have noticed that it's coming out and asked me if we are going to face a big upgrade hurdle again, and I just told him that yeah, we are at that level already, so it hasn't been that bad anymore.
I'm glad to hear it. So another thing that I wanted to discuss that I mentioned in the morning talk is the idea of revising the record driver hierarchy a little bit. And I want honest opinions of whether this is my nitpick or if this is actually something that would be valuable. But my complaint about the current setup of record drivers is that basically there's Solr default, which defines the vast majority of the logic, and then everything subclasses that, which makes sense for some things and makes no sense for other things, because, for example, WorldCat, which doesn't use Solr at all, doesn't really make sense as a subclass of Solr default. It's only set up that way because it's convenient to inherit the logic from Solr default. So what I would kind of like to do is create a new lower level class called something like Bibliographic Record, where that low level functionality and all the default templates are defined, then have Solr default be a subclass of Bibliographic Record, have WorldCat be a subclass of Bibliographic Record, and so on. And for cases in the hierarchy where there is specific mark record related logic that's right now being brought in through inheritance, I'd rather compose that in through traits so that a record could have a mark aware trait that gives it all the functions around parsing mark records and pulling data out of them. I think that the upshot of this is that from the end perspective, not much will change because you could still inherit from Solr default and get the same stuff you have today, but there would be another level of abstraction above that that would just make the hierarchy make more sense. And we might be able to reduce some complexity and refactor some logic in a more sensible way. But as I say, I don't know that there's a lot of benefit to doing this. It feels right to me, and it's something that's been bugging me, but maybe it's a huge waste of time if nobody cares.
Would it make your calls to methods a lot easier for accessing across the system? So say I need to go pull this one method from record driver, but I can't get to it because I've got to customize the code so I can actually find my way over to that method, or I've got to put it in another file. I'm just saying with some of the customizations that we've done that I know that I've asked you, how do I get to this piece of information or this method, and I put it in Solr default, but I can't access it. And it might just be my complete naivety and ignorance on it, but if it would help with that, I'd be all for it.
So Leela's question is whether this refactoring would make it easier to access record driver methods.
Or other driver methods that could be custom.
Right.
That could be a subset of Biblio.
Yeah, or custom methods. And I think the answer is it probably wouldn't actually make much difference, because the fundamental problem with VuFind's customization model is that you can't override a superclass and have it change anything. So, if you override the Solr default service and some other service is using a subclass of Solar default, you have to override that one too to change its parent class. And that's just sort of a limitation of how PHP works.
Or would it be possible to put your customizations in its own file that then inherit from, I don't know what to do, or, I don't know.
Well, it certainly is possible to put your customizations in your own file. It's just the way I would probably do it, if I needed to add the same functionality to a whole bunch of classes, would be to create a trait containing the custom functionality and then extend all the necessary classes to incorporate that trait. But that's still kind of a pain and a lot of overhead if you have, 20 classes. But that is what traits gives you. Is it's still not beautiful, but it at least gives you the ability to share some logic and mix it in, and at least only have one thing to edit at the end of the day. But again, I don't think what I'm proposing changes that at all. It makes things a little tidier.
The traits are exactly the thing that we are using to add functionality to many classes, and to just add that we care, or at least I care. Every time I look at the Prima driver and it says that it's extending from Solar default, makes me cringe.
Okay. So
yeah, I'm all for changing the hierarchy.
great. And I don't think it will actually take that much time to put together a proof of concept. This is definitely one of those things I want to get into a pull request and have a bunch of people bang on it before we merge it to master. But I definitely would like to see that happen by the 5.0 release.
Just a quick question. Does this enable the potential for using something like Elasticsearch in the future? Does it basically make it harder to do that, or is it actually making it more reasonable to?
So the question is, does this make support for Elasticsearch or something like that more feasible in the future? And the answer again is sort of yes and no. In theory, you could do Elasticsearch right now, but you would probably end up with an Elasticsearch class that extends Solar default, which is just stupid looking and conceptually wrong. Whereas in the future, you could have an Elasticsearch that extends bibliographic record, which makes sense.
Can you just make sure that there is no authority record extending the bibliographic record?
True. Maybe bibliographic record is just the wrong class name.
Yeah, maybe something even more generic would be useful.
Right. Default record.
Yeah. Or base record or something.
Yes. So did you capture that, Chris?
Some of it. Trying to keep up with the organization overall. Yeah, I have these 2 points.
All right, so
Very good ones.
I think the main things to capture beyond that are create base record class, not bibliographic record class. And the fact that thumbs up from Eric. I'm not the only one.
There will be a proof of concept, so.
Yes. Great. So is there anyone currently on the line or in the room who has a strong opinion about the two-factor authentication or the user customization? Are those more than theoretical for anyone? Chris just raised his hand.
Yeah.
I assume you care about the user customization more than the two-factor, or you care about both?
Well, I think the idea of two-factor is much more pressing, I think, these days, but I mean both of them would be kind of go hand in hand.
True.
But the only thing I put up for two-factor, which I would happily attack, but we need recommendations for services because Auth0, which is like a SMS-based one, requires a subscription to Twilio, which is a paid service, and all the other notification services I know are all paid, unless Firebase update or something like that. So if we can find the right service, two-factor authentication would be trivial, which is why it's more pressing for me. But yeah, user customization has been on my plate technically for like 3 years now, so I just haven't.
So to summarize what Chris just said, he views the two-factor as a higher priority than the user customization, which has been on his plate for a while and just hasn't come up in priority. But he feels that finding a free service to test this out with would be beneficial for getting the implementation or having some expertise on what services we should support. My one comment I have on that is the way I would approach this is develop the infrastructure, come up with the interface for what does a secondary authentication mechanism look like, and then I would create a demo two-factor authentication that always expects the code 1234 and use that as my initial test implementation.
Yeah,
And then,
it would work based off the password resetting. It'd be very similar.
mm-hmm.
It's just getting the notification or the syncing out there is the problem. Because sending a text message now it's like 0.6 of a cent per, which is trivial. But if finding an open source or a free option would make it much easier to adopt.
Right. But my point is and Chris was saying the cost is sending the text message, and my comment is if you use that demo one that just accepts 1234, you just pretend that there was a text message and you can still test the workflow. Because you could also, in theory, not have text messages at all if there's a way to integrate with something like Google Authenticator or one of those apps that just generates numbers on a schedule. But certainly, this is something where the first round of hard work is coming up with a sensible interface for the plugins that address it. And once that's working, there's a lot of potential for building plugins for a ton of things. And that just comes down to what do we actually need to support. So I don't think objectifying JS is controversial. I think we've already come a long way on that, and doing more of that sounds good to me. Front-end feature modularity, what exactly are we referring to there?
That's what came up during the talk, is that if we made it more modular, they started the discussion of making the template smaller. So like customizing smaller bits and making it so that when changes and new features do come out, it's not like it doesn't break everything else.
Right.
Whether you want that feature or not.
I think what we need there is identifying areas where further improvement is still needed, because I think last year we actually went through a couple rounds of improving some of these things and reached a point where nobody was complaining about anything in particular, which is not to say that there's not room to complain about more things, but I definitely love some input on where further improvement is possible.
Geographic features.
Okay.
That's definitely one of them I want to do.
Great.
And I think we've done a great job on the new templates with setting up that plug and play is super awesome and easy to. You don't have to customize the whole page. I like that a lot. So.
There's positive feedback on other recent changes, and certainly I think the biggest thing that changed this past year was the way we do record displays, where we used to have huge hard-coded templates building tables, and now we just have a plugin that builds a table based on a configuration, which I think raised the learning curve, but cut out huge amounts of code.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to get positive feedback on that because I was a little bit wary about it, but I think it worked out. It certainly made my life easier.
So much more flexible. We get to customize for each of our databases the different fields that we display, especially on the core page. So being able to just plug in our base and then change that out, rather than having to go in and manage that, especially as we're upgrading, it's beautiful. And the other thing that's been really nice is the static pages. So tell Ari that that's been really awesome too, because we've got to generate a lot of static pages. So that was nice and a lot easier to do than the old way.
So Leela also sends her thanks for the static page mechanism, which has been really useful for her, in addition to being able to customize core displays more easily than before. So hooray for the things we do actually helping people.
Nice. I added one more point about a possibility to include a pop-up info or certain sort of always on help text in certain locations or on different displays. I think while I believe that the functionality should be quite self-explanatory, so that you don't need to have like longer help text or descriptions of functionality everywhere. We found that quite a few libraries want to add something. For example, on the loans page, they want to say something about the policies or something like that. So that may be something that if you had some sort of places where you all had like by default empty translation texts, but you could add some if you need there, it would allow you to add those without modifying the templates themselves. Another possibility would be to have by default empty templates that you could render as a top
I think something just happened to your mic. You got quiet at the end, but we got the vast majority of that, and I agree that is a great idea. I can think of at least one place here at Villanova where we have a help text on, I think, on the retain current facets checkbox to explain what that is for. So if we could do that without maintaining a custom template, that would be nice.
There's JavaScript solutions for that, I think.
Yeah, of course you can change the user interface with JavaScript, so you don't need to change the templates. But that's nasty in many places. But regarding the checkbox of keeping the active filters, I think it could be something that could be revisited at some point. We are toying around with a couple of different options to replace that and doing some usability testing with those. So I can share the results with you when we have them complete. But the idea that we have not at the moment is to move the active filters from the sidebar to right below the search box, and then provide a way to just clear them all once, or have a checkbox that would keep or remove them, but have them together so that the context would be clear to the user.
That definitely makes some good amount of sense. And certainly right now, the active filters are very tied into the side facets bar, which isn't necessarily logical because really those are two independent controls.
Yeah, but we have now had a first round of usability testings, and they will continue, I think, next week or so. So I think we will have some pretty good results available after that.
Great.
We'll see how it goes. But that's at least one place where we have found the usability a little bit problematic, because if we check the retain filters box by default, users don't notice that, and then they don't know why they don't get the results that they're expecting. And if we clear it by default, then they can't keep them. So it's, even if we have tried to highlight it, it's still easy to miss.
Yeah, I agree that that's always been something of a pain point. And actually, this also reminds me of another item from my list that might be worth discussing as far as priorities go, which is the idea of having some new kind of plugin for the VuFind homepage, where right now the VuFind homepage is hard-coded to do the sort of default list of facets, which may or may not be useful. It would be nice if maybe we were able to drop in plugins there like we do recommendation modules elsewhere, so that the facet list code could be refactored to a plugin. We could add things like, you know, maybe something that wraps around the channels interface, so you could have a default channel on the homepage, or maybe some of the geographic stuff, drop a map there, or whatever. That might make this more customizable with less footprint in the changes. It might also allow more code sharing, because right now we're implementing that facet thing in multiple places in different ways. Maybe that could become just one control that's configured differently for different services. The only thing to be cautious of in this is that whatever we do, it ought to be cacheable, because we don't want to put high intensity computations on the homepage that's presumably going to get hit a lot. But that could be something that's built into the design of the plugins potentially. Or it could just be a cautionary note that if you're going to build a plugin, make it smart about caching data, or else.
Oh, that reminds me. It might be useful to add the APIs that in some situations it can be really useful to have an API, for example, to clear caches.
That is true.
For instance, right after you've indexed Solar new records into Solar, you could just call the API to clear the cache for the facets.
Yeah, and that logic.
You can have it like. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just saying that logic already exists in the admin module, so exposing it as an API would probably be fairly trivial. It would mainly be a matter of figuring out what the security concerns around that are.
Now that there are nice permissions module options you can use, it should be quite easy to do.
Definitely.
For instance, an IP restriction would work wonders already.
Mm-hmm.
We already have one like that, so when we publish new changes to the views, we can clear the caches, so I can maybe work out something, or I think it's trivial enough for you to do it too. So, but we can work together to make it as compatible as possible.
Definitely worth adding to the API list.
I'll do that.
Thank you.
Chris got there already.
And the official Salvi library note here. Unofficial?
So it seems to me like we might have kind of the rough shape of where we're going here, with the Villanova team working on ILS stuff, some sort of infrastructural work, the record driver hierarchy refactor, the search home plugin thing, getting to PHP 7, which ties to upgrading some of our dependencies to take advantage of newer versions. I think that's probably a year's worth of work for us. Then we've got Leela doing some geographic enhancements. We've got Array doing some API and user-facing functionality. I think that's pretty nice to begin with, and I see.
I'll work on some of the channels, the recently like loaded or popular publications, and get that that's on my list to do.
Oh, great.
Try that as well, and that might kind of tie into that wrapper on the homepage.
So Leela said she's also interested in working on some of the channel possibilities that haven't been implemented yet, like popular items or recently added items, which also ties in with, for some of us, it would be useful to have maybe a new ILS driver method that provides recently returned items, or that's something we've been talking about, which we might work on implementing, at least for Voyager, for our own purposes, but others might be interested in participating too.
That's a good idea.
Great. And I guess Leela also expressed some interest in following up on Ben's call to action, so that would be most welcomed.
Just sort of as a note of curiosity, since I noticed you had a ticket open about considering Elasticsearch for the future, that would make the service model even cheaper. Because right now, in terms of how involved those two solutions are, Elasticsearch has wider adoption, it seems, and also many service providers who just provide it, including Amazon. So that would be an interesting little thing to explore.
We're looking at that for some of our repository stuff that we're building in Islandora, so
Cool.
yeah.
I was
All
wanting to
this kind of
explore
like
that, so I didn't get very far, but that's what we tried.
So for the benefit of the stream, Ben was just pointing out that Elasticsearch in the hosted environment tends to be cheaper and more widely supported than Solr, so the idea of adding that as a search backend could be beneficial in that space. And as I said, I think the main obstacle there, at least the first step obstacle, is that we don't have a MARC importer that feeds Elasticsearch, but I don't think that's something that would be very difficult to implement using a minor modification to SolarMark with the right expertise. Again, it comes down to, there would be a lot of work re-implementing every single thing on top of Elasticsearch instead of Solr, but at least for the baseline core required functionality, I don't think that would be a huge amount of work, at least no more work than adding another API-driven backend like Summon or EDS, which we've been through several times already.
I'll propose a Solr emulation layer for Elasticsearch. That will solve all the problems.
I wouldn't be completely surprised if such a thing existed. Whether it worked right is another question. So we've been going at it for an hour. I think we've got a pretty good rough idea. Is there anything anyone wants to add, or should we let Eric get some sleep and switch gears to breakout sessions for the rest of the afternoon?
Thanks for being so considerate.
Oh, thanks for coming. Your input has been greatly appreciated and helpful, as always. And I'm sure we'll talk more as we digest this, but we've gotten a lot of good stuff written down, so this is, as always, a helpful start for the year to come. And so, if I'm not mistaken, I think the stream will come back online around 9:30 tomorrow. For right now, we have one lightning talk on the board. But certainly if anyone else has things to share, it's not too late. But it may be a very short stream tomorrow.
I'm gonna add a lightning talk section for anyone online who wants to.
All right, so Chris is adding a lightning talk section to this Google document to add another means of signing up for those who cannot physically reach our whiteboard. But no pressure if you don't actually have anything you care to talk about. But at the same time, if you have something that takes more than 5 minutes, you could take 20 and it would fit. So. I would also encourage everyone, if they're interested, to go through this document and put their initials or asterisks or something on anything they think are particularly high priority, just to help us prioritize. Otherwise, we will just use our own arbitrary bias, and you'll get what you get.
If you scroll up to the priority changes, you can tell them to either do votes, like a separate votes item like I did. Keep going. There. Like a separate votes thing, or just put it next to, like you can just put it right here as well. Whatever
Yeah.
works.
I like the votes thing. I think that's more clearly visible.
Sweet. There you go.
Yeah, poor VuFind 4.2 is not going to get off the ground at this rate.
Have we ever had a 0.2?
We did before we went to stricter semantic versioning. I think we got up to 2.4 before we went to 3.0.
Okay. So now since 3.0.
Yeah, yeah.
Was our first semantic version.
Exactly. So now it's kind of, the summit defines what the next major version will do. Then we do one maintenance release that adds a few more things before the next summit. And that's been our kind of release groove.
It's been major maintenance, minor maintenance,
Yeah,
on repeat.
exactly. And also to everyone in the room and out of the room, I'm certainly interested in feedback on this event, because I know it's a little smaller this year than it's been. I've still found it very helpful. I think there have been some great conversations in this room, but you know, if maybe we want to not do it every year or try a different format or something. I'm open to continuing down this path. I'm open to different things. If anyone feels that they've wasted their time by traveling all this way to be in a room with 5 other people, you know. But like I say, I'm feeling good energy here, so I'm not upset. I didn't fly here from the other side of the country either, so.
I can say from the remote side that it's been nice to participate this way, but it would be really have been nice to be part of the conversations at the coffee table and everything, of course. So I would really love to be there, but well, it's a couple of thousands of kilometers too much for me this year, and well, it's not you, it's the president.
You're not the only one with that problem. The other possibility that comes with the possibility of an organizational home is there could conceivably be a situation where we're part of an organization with other open source projects, and there's a shared conference where there could be more cross communication across communities, while also having time for focus sessions on specific projects. So that's one possibility for scaling this thing up and getting more people engaged that I'm interested in looking at. But before that can happen, we need to be part of a community and see that that works out. But
Are there any other conferences that you guys go to submit like papers or sessions on VuFind to just kind of raise that awareness?
so Leela's question was, are there other conferences that we attend where we submit papers on VuFind and so forth? And honestly, the biggest forum for this kind of thing is Code for Lib.
Right.
And I feel that the Code for Lib community is not that excited about VuFind. We submitted proposals. I think the last time one was accepted was in 2011. And I think it's in part because there is such a huge Ruby on Rails predominance that PHP projects aren't cool enough for that crowd, which I think is a shame.
We do always have a breakout session during Code for Lib.
Right, yeah, we
Right,
do breakouts. We have some success that way, but as far as getting on the main stage and getting a lot of eyeballs, it hasn't worked out in a while. We also tried a pre-conference a couple of years ago, and again, it almost got enough votes to happen, but we fell slightly short.
We do get shout outs a lot from the stage.
Yeah, it's not like everyone hates us and we have no hope of communicating, but we've been around too long. We're just not exciting from that perspective.
Do you have a sense of the whole user base for VuFind? I mean, that's another question that I have is, we have the one page on the wiki that says these are all the installations, but my guess is that there's a lot more out there than just that list, or is that the only list?
Yeah, the other question is, what is the size of the user base? How does it compare to what's on the wiki? It's probably bigger than that. I would agree. Well, there's also the situation of there are tons of VuFind users, but there are relatively few active VuFind developers because a lot of people get it up, invest the effort, and then just let it run itself indefinitely from there. So, you know, the people in this room are the people who, or the people on this call are the people who are really actively engaging with it. And there are a few people who couldn't make it, who I know of. I also gather that there are some people who are doing a lot of work on it and just don't engage with the rest of the community for whatever reason, which is fine, but you know, we'd love to hear from them too.
Because that was kind of leading towards maybe, in terms of looking at your yearly conference, if all you had in terms of developers, where this is really a developer conference, you only have a small handful, you know, that could guide whether you do it in person or online or kind of a combination thereof, and how frequently.
Right.
And also how to reach out and make the development community more connected. I don't know how that would work.
Right. So Lila said, you know, based on the size of the development community, that can help drive what the strategy is for meeting frequency and in person versus not. And again, that's one of the things that I find appealing about the concept of being part of a shared conference with other projects, because then I think one of the problems with this event is that for several years, I think we got a lot of VuFind curious attendees who came to see, what's this all about, should I get involved? And it has refined down to, these are the core people who are using VuFind, and it's very, very technical. And it's in fact not inviting to people outside of that audience. Whereas I think if you were in that shared environment, every project could have this is what our project is about and why you should care about it, to invite new people in, to complement the deep in the details techie stuff that we tend to do here. So again, that it's all theoretical right now, but I think it would certainly be nice to be able to do more outreach to say, this is why VuFind is cool, why don't you come try it, this is what it can do for you. But figuring out who to reach with that message is increasingly challenging because it's not the shiny new thing, but it obviously still serves a need. And it's also possible that we can leverage things like the channels interface, which I think is fairly innovative and tends to excite people, or you know, a linked data project utilizing VuFind, or things like that that show this is relevant in new and different ways. It's not just a replacement for your OPAC, even though it's a perfectly good replacement for your OPAC if that's what you're into.
Just a note from the European side. One colleague of mine was attending the German VuFind conference just the other week, and they came up with the idea of having a European conference since the German one is the predominantly German-speaking event, and prevents quite a few folks from other parts of Europe from participating. So this is something we will continue discussing, but it's possible that, for example, Finland could host the European VuFind conference, and we could maybe gather some of the European users that find it difficult to travel overseas.
That would be great, and certainly I think the European community doesn't have the same biases that the American community has, for better or worse. So there certainly seems to be, well, I mean, the German event is huge, so I unfairly dismiss the fact that there are 50 or 60 people getting together for that event when I say that we're all here. But I did see several representatives of that group on the call during the first session. So, but there's certainly more people we could be talking to, and the language barrier is at least something of an obstacle. Though there are a lot of great English speakers in all these groups, which just make it all the more embarrassing for me to be the ugly American who doesn't speak any other languages.
Don't worry about that. We'll make sure to invite you too if you want to travel for change. But it's understandable if it's difficult for you to come here. But we'll see how it turns out. There's nothing specific yet, but that's something that's under consideration anyway.
I would definitely love to be involved. Maybe brave the travel, or if not, there's always online. But certainly talking to more people would be great.
I think that's there is exactly the problem that people don't know what they are missing out because they don't know what VuFind can do. Because I don't think it compares, or any other product really compares to the versatility and the features, the amount of features that VuFind has, and the systems it really works with, and all the integrations it does. It's just way ahead of most of the others in reality, at least, because those at least some commercial products are, of course, they are advertised as being the whole package and doing everything for you, but they fall short on that, while VuFind provides. But if you can't get the message through, I know it's impossible to actually get the audience.
Maybe just add a comment. It's Richard, the Park Service. Park Service is just now facing in solar, and our VuFind installation actually gives a nice working example of how to set it up, how to configure it. So from that perspective, from this IT perspective in the government, VuFind is a great, showcases lots of interesting features technically. So that's what I wanted to add to this little conversation.
Another thing that might help with setting up VuFind as a service, it would give you more ways to kind of show some different demonstrations of what can be done, and maybe there's something that can be done with the wiki to say, we've got a lot of great information out there, but maybe there's another way to package it so that it's more discoverable on the web in terms of, VuFind this, VuFind that, with a lot of different links into how people are using VuFind differently.
Yeah, Leela points out that VuFind as a service offers more possibilities for showing off different aspects of what the software can do, and that perhaps the website could be refined to better showcase the different use cases and make the software discoverable in different contexts. And I think certainly, the problem with the ad hoc project run by techies is that the marketing and the sort of organizational hierarchy fall by the wayside because that's not where we're focused. Having more people to contribute to those things could only help.
I have an idea along that line. So I don't know if you guys have a business school here or not, but one thing that we've done at our, for one of the programs where I work is we've got one of our advisory members is on Bentley University, which has a business school. And so we've worked with those students to do like research projects on marketing for getting more information out there, making things more discoverable. So if there's a way that you can leverage the university community or faculty that need projects.
Lila pointed out that sometimes partnering with a business school is a good way to get help with these kinds of projects, and certainly Villanova has a school of business, so that's a very good idea that I think is worth following up on to maybe get some support.
And I can talk to you offline about kind of how we did that and how we structured those products.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And another comment from the Park Service is that the map interface is absolutely wonderful, and it's it sets a standard, really, I think. So, thanks to mostly the work that Leila has done, I guess. So,
Thank you.
She says thank you. And thank you, Lila, for doing it.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you captured any of that, Chris, but talk to business school should be an action item.
Yeah.
You can put me on that too, and I can.
I'm just not sure where to put that. I'll figure it out.
Yeah, that's sort of long-term strategy.
Yeah.
I also certainly think as some of us come online with the channels interface, that may be conference fodder to talk about the usability of that. And right now it's unproven, but we're going to go live with it here at Villanova in the coming year, and I imagine others might use it as well. And I think we'll learn some things and probably refine it, and that's the kind of thing that plays well at conferences. All right, have we wound down? Any last comments from anyone?
Thank you all for the day. It was really useful for me too.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time and staying up. And we will perhaps see you in the morning tomorrow, and if not, online elsewhere.
I try to be there for tomorrow, so I believe we will see you then.
Very good. Have a good night in the meantime.
Thank you. Have a nice rest of the day.
Thank you.